Hello, I'm Herstal Ullricht, Rock Farm. The farm's situated in South Canterbury, right alongside the village of Cave. We're looking across to the home farm, across the valley. It's a dry north-northwest facing type property, clay downs, and we've planted forestry in areas over there where either we're looking for gorse control or they're nasty corners that aren't good for stock. In total, we've got two properties where we're standing at the moment. We're on a property on the other side of the valley, which below us is irrigated. In total, there's about 680 hectares between the two properties, and between the two properties, we've got about 55 to 60 hectares of forestry, and quite a few shoulder belts. The stands across on the home farm are, as you can see, mainly radiata. Being such a dry spot, there's not a lot of opportunity for other species other than maybe some eucalypts, which we do have over there, a small stand for firewood use. The main stand of radiata you can see in front of us running up the gully, that's actually a joint venture planting, where there's two investors have done the planting and the silviculture, and we own the land, so when it comes to milling the forest block there, the proceeds will be split third. There's a couple of sites where we've got back faces on that farm which we can't actually see from this angle. Over the top, beyond the shoulder belts, over the top, where there's a couple of small sites of macrocarpa. Yeah, most of the planting is, as you might call it, below the plough line, or gorsey knobs, gorsey gullies, and that gully up the main is a classic example. Further around this way, you can see a gorsey knob, and then a valley leading up. Again, that was gorse control. That gorsey knob we haven't planted because it's such a hard little site. We don't even think radiata would survive there terribly well, so we just put up with having gorse on that knob. But pretty much everywhere else you see forestry on this farm over there is where there has been a gorse issue, and it will be below the plough line. We have got a number of shelter belts over there. The trees are right along the top skyline at the moment, and that's not the boundary of the farm, but they're there for a southerly shelter, for lambing shelter, things like that. They're mainly Leyland, cypress and Cedrus, deodara shelter belts. They seem to survive quite well up there, and I would like to plant more shelter belts, particularly on our boundary fence with the next farm, which is further up. Something similar, and I'm talking with that neighbour, and he's quite keen, but we just haven't got round to be able to agree on what to do and how and when to do it. No, the tree planting hasn't cost us any grazing or income or production, mainly because they're planted in sites that we didn't get much grazing out of anyway. But even if there is the odd site that we could have still grazed, the shelter effects that the forestry gives us improves the pasture growing beyond that. So if anything, we've probably improved our carrying capacity with the shelter effects of forestry. I mean, that gully running up the middle is effectively a forestry block, but it's giving us quite good northwest shelter to the land on the east side of that. Not perfect because of the way the land's shaped or lies to the wind, but we've noticed a big improvement already. This is our second property, or we've owned it for many years as well. It's a much smaller property. The flats are irrigated with 2 centre pivots and a little bit of hard hose gun. In total, and where we're standing here now, we bought 45 hectares this autumn, so we've now got a bit of balance, a bit of hill, easy downs with the flats on this side of the river and valley, and it's a very productive small unit, currently dairy support unit. But it basically runs, you can see the winter feed over here with the water tank on it. It runs up here and along that dark face below the older trees. And that dark face was planted in 1982 to 84, shortly after I came back from Lincoln and overseas, the usual OE experience. We went through had been going through a series of wetter years, and that steep dark face was slumping quite badly and was coming down through the bottom fence onto the flats. So we actually managed to get in those days, a catchment board subsidy to plant that to stop the stumping. And it was fully pruned, three lifts. And we milled it at 27 and 28 years old, a year and a half ago. And it's been replanted the same year as milling. So, and then we have on this flats we have 3 shelter belts. The first one's a eucalypt, just in front of us, a eucalypt and Cedrus deodara shelter belt. The second one is a Leyland cypress, Cedrus deodara shelter belt, and the third one on the bottom boundary where there's actually a road running that way is just a poplar deciduous shelter belt. Not really giving us a little bit of easterly shelter, I guess. In fact, the funds from the forestry, milling the forestry over on the back, the dark face, yielded us enough money to do a whole lot of things, including that water storage pond for the irrigation. So this sort of property is more intensely planted, both forestry and shelter, but particularly shelter because the wind's blowing over our shoulders, if you like, down off this hill, and that shelter there takes the brunt of the nor'west off rather well. The trees, we've fundamentally planted trees for a purpose, for a job, and over on that farm it's mainly been for weed control. Take unproductive land and to stop the gorse spreading, and if we can control the gorse enough to get trees established, have a potential income from a class of land that would probably otherwise struggle to yield much income if you have to spend money spraying gorse all the time. So I'm not a person that just loves planting trees for the sake of planting trees. I do like trees, but they actually have to yield a benefit for me, otherwise I'm not really so interested. I'll be absolutely sure we haven't lost any grazing from it, and we've gained productivity, so it's got to be a win-win. If in terms of starting again and a young guy getting onto the land, I wouldn't hesitate to plant trees where there's a useful benefit for trees. They add value to the farm, they add aesthetic value to the farm, they add value to the livestock welfare, and that's going to become, the way things are moving, a bigger issue going forward. So shade and shelter for livestock. So if you can create a win-win or a double win with trees, as we've done, planted in gnarly spots, but giving you shade and shelter. The other aspect of trees, I think, as farmers, I've always taken the view that you need to have a bit of a diversified income base. Just simply relying on sheep and beef wouldn't have been a smart move in the last few years, barring the last decade or so. So having a bit of diversified income, and interesting enough for us, when we've ever had some of the trees we've milled so far, that site there we've milled just behind us on this dark face was the first site that I've milled, that I've planted. Other sites that we've milled have been much smaller, and areas where my father planted some trees in the first place. And although we basically milled them when they were ready, by chance it tended to be during a drought or some downturn in income, so that extra $20,000 or $30,000 income from a small forest area was actually very, very useful, as you can imagine. So if we get onto this site here, it was about 12 hectares. I think we netted about $180,000 off that 12 hectares. That's after milling costs and everything. That's what we banked, of which we spent a sizable chunk of that on that irrigation pond down there and other things. So if you have goals of retiring debt off the farm, that's a good way of doing it. The good thing about trees is, of course, you don't have to harvest them the year they're ready. So if the log price is low that year and you don't particularly need the money, you can sit and hold tight. There's not many other agricultural games you can do that. Once the crop's ready to harvest, or the animals are up to weight, or whatever else they've got to go, pretty much. Or worse still, if you're a dairy farm, you've got to do it twice a day. What have trees done for us? Well, they've given us a variation to the landscape, so that's an aesthetic value. They've given us shade and shelter, not over the whole farm, but certainly in significant parts of it. And as the animal welfare code and the overseas markets begin to understand things like that, that might become more important in the near future, I suspect. They've given us weed control. We're dealing with gorse as an annual, some people call it another mortgage around your neck. So we've been able to sidestep that by planting those areas in gorse, spending the money once and once only. And then the best part of it is they've given us some diversified income, and often that income comes on stream when perhaps other things aren't so good. So that's helped us balance the budgets over the years.